This is Beth. This is Beth. Wendell and I are sitting here in our family room. It is the 5th of March, 1980, and we received these tapes from Jay in last October, and we listened to them at that time, and we decided that we wouldn't listen to them again so that we would report things as we remember them. And we've sat here reminiscing and reviewing the events that led up to the accident that took Mom's life. And we hope that we can tell you in the way that we remember it, and that it will be a benefit in this report that you want. We just played the last of Barbara's talk to get us started. And in thinking back of Jay, one thing that I'd like to mention first that particularly stands out in my memory was that as we stood in the Relief Society room there beside Mom's coffin, I remember Jay stepping up to the coffin with tears streaming down his face. He told Mom that he would do everything he could for the rest of his life to make up and repay her for all that she had done. That stands out strong in my memory. It was very touching. And I think Jay has lived up to every bit of it. First, we'd like to go back to Saturday, the 30th day of March in 1957. We had received word from Mom that they were going to fly up from Bountiful in Dee's plane, that she wanted help in reviewing and correcting her income tax report that had to do with them selling the shop in Boise and selling their land and buying the place in Bountiful. And I had helped some, and she wanted us to help her. And so as we remember, we were to meet them around 10:30 or 11 o'clock that day at the little airport out on Highway 44, about 4 or 5 miles northwest of Boise. And we got our family ready. We had 10 then. Wendell was nearly 19 years old, and Kaylin was a little less than 2 years old. And we all went over to the airport. And I don't know what we did all that time, but we waited and waited and waited. The airport checked, and they found that they had filed their flight plan and had left. But later in the afternoon, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock, they received a call that they had had trouble, but that they had landed safely in Park Valley. So we, disappointed naturally, we got in the car and went back to Marsing, where we lived. And we had only been there a few minutes when we received a phone call about 7 o'clock, as I remember it, telling us that they had crash landed in Park Valley and that they were all in the Tremonton Hospital. I really can't remember, and Daddy says he can't either, just what we did to get over to Meridian to Pat and Leona Jones's place. Possibly Wendell took us, but we rode with them down to Tremonton. And I remember we stopped at Stravell at the state line, and they told us a little about it and told us that they were in Tremonton. And it kind of soothed us. I remember Sister Jones was pretty nervous about it, but anyway, we went on down to Tremonton, and I'll never forget when we walked in that hospital. Dee was sitting there on a Davenport that was just inside the door. Ivalu was with him, but he looked terrible. He was cut up, his face, and he had a patch by one eye, and his nose and his lip was cut. He was swelled, and he told us a little bit about it. He hadn't gone home yet. I don't understand how come, but he had been examined and released to go back to Bountiful. But then we went up to the folks' room, and I don't remember the order that we went into, but naturally Brother and Sister Jones wanted to go in with Joanne, who was with Bill. And I remember he was under heavy sedation, but he was in such pain.
I don't think I've ever seen a person in as much pain or endure the pain that he was enduring and still stay conscious. It was more than I could stand almost.
Oh, it was terrible. Then we went into Dad's room, and Dad was unconscious. They had him up over a sort of a saddle thing. They had x-rayed him and found that his back was broken down low, and they couldn't set it with him unconscious, so they had him on this saddle thing on his back, and he was just breathing heavy. And in Mom's room, as soon as we walked in, Mom recognized us.
She seemed very much alert, was able to converse with us, and we didn't realize, with the exception of the scalp or the way her head had been scalped, that there was anything serious until we found out that she also had a crushed ankle, which later proved to be the thing that took her life.
This scalp part, it had kind of had an arc cut down to her eyebrow, and it had skinned the flesh all back, and they had brought that forward and stitched it, and she was slightly swelled, but other than that, she looked pretty good. She was propped up to a semi-sitting position, and really talked to us quite a little bit, and rationally so.
One thing I remember her saying was, "Oh, you shouldn't have come.
Yeah.
We're all right."
That's right. I remember that. Well, then we went downstairs now to a little payphone out on the side of the road, and to phone the different members of the family to tell them the condition, what had happened, and those in Portland and Pendleton and California. I can't remember what all, but I particularly remember that the operator was rather rude, and she thought I was a Mr. instead of a Mrs., and she was really rude. But anyway, we called them, and I have in mind that they must have driven all night or part of the night, because it seems that they got there a pretty good time Sunday. And it was decided Sunday that we would call in a specialist, we thought, for Bill and Dad. And but the family was all there. I remember we were all in the waiting room waiting while this specialist from Salt Lake was examining each of them.
Well, didn't he call us together there?
Yes, he called us together into that family room.
And the thing that was astonishing to me anyway, I don't know if the rest of you or not, was that the fact that he brought out that Mom's crushed ankle was a serious thing to consider, that the fatty substance from the bone marrow was circulating through her blood, and that any time it might lodge at any place and cause a situation like a blood clot would, and that might cause insanity or paralyzed condition or situations
blindness
that wouldn't well, in fact he told us that we ought to fast and pray that rather than that happen to her, that her life should be taken. And so that, I think, was what brought us together as a family. And we went over and decided to fast, went over to the apartments, decided to fast, we offered a prayer as a whole family, which was really inspirational, and then we fasted until, what was it, Tuesday?
Yeah, this apartment was a little kind of a double room with a kitchenette in it, apartment that was just right across the road from the hospital south. And like Wendell says, we knelt down and had family prayer. It was then that we decided to cut down in the number of those that go into each room, and that we would plan to have about 2 in each room throughout day and night. We had no idea when Dad gained consciousness, and we wanted someone to be right there. And so we took turns. Well, all day Monday, there wasn't much change, except that they, if I remember correctly, they sent Bill to a Salt Lake hospital where he would get more intensive care for the type of injury that he had.
Also, he would get more up-to-date, there would be more up-to-date equipment and better nursing facilities for Bill, which he needed. And during Monday, that day Monday, people from Meridian and Boise started coming through to go to conference, general conference, and they stop and visit with Mom, and she would recognize them and visit with them and seemed alert all that day, and then again Tuesday morning before
we went to eat.
Before we went to eat, there were people that stopped, like Z. Reed Miller, who knew her so well, stopped to visit with her. There were other families, too, that I just can't remember. It seems to me like Brother McQueen was one of them, and
George and Mabel Rowlands.
George and Mabel Rowlands, yeah, I believe they stopped.
Then I remember the other 2 members of Kenneth's bishopric in Pendleton stopped by also.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there were quite a number of people stopped during that time.
And she was very alert, very interested in them, and indicated that everything was all right.
The only one she didn't recognize was sometime Tuesday. Dee came back, an Ivaloo from Bountiful, and she thought it was Floyd when he walked in. She didn't recognize that it was Dee. And that's naturally so, because he was quite badly swelled, his face and head. And so he would look different, but she could tell by the coloring. It was right during this period of time, Tuesday morning sometime, or before about 1 o'clock, when Mom said, "I've been a good girl." And we told her that yes, she had been a real good girl, that she had lived a good life and done good, but we never dreamed that she would be leaving us. Anyway, it was because she had improved so much and visited with people, and everything seemed to be fine, except that Dad was still unconscious, and of course Bill was in Salt Lake. But it was decided that we would go across the road and have prayer and break our fast. And so President Ficklin said that he would keep close watch, and the nurses, he would see that they stayed with each of them so that we could go. And we went across the road and knelt and thanked our Heavenly Father for the great blessings that we had received, and that Mom seemed to have been able to throw off the fat that had filtered into her bloodstream, like the specialist told us. And then we cooked hamburgers for all of us, and there was quite a number of us. And it must have taken about, we must have gone over there, about 1 o'clock?
Imagine.
And it must have taken two and a half hours or so, because when we went back, we had decided that we would again take turns, and we knew that some would have to stay up at night. So it was determined that just Daddy and I would go to Mom's room, and Vaughn and Sheila would go to Dad's room. So the four of us walked over there together. Each of us went into our rooms. And as we walked into Mom's room, like I said, she was propped up so that she was in a half-sitting position, and she didn't turn and greet us when we walked in. We walked over to her bed, and I took hold of her right hand, and it was totally lifeless. And she was staring straight ahead at the wall in front of her. And immediately we knew something was wrong. We spoke to her, and she didn't respond, and I reached over and took her other hand, and she moved it. But also Wendell turned immediately to get Dr. Ficklin. And when President Ficklin came in, he asked us to leave the room.
And as we stepped out of Mom's room, Vaughn and Sheila were alerted, realizing that there was something wrong with Dad. And so as we stepped in there, Dad had rolled his head back, pushed himself up so that his head was just tipped right back toward the wall. His eyes were wide open and staring, and his eyes were rolled right back like he was looking through the wall to Mother.
Yeah, it just like he knew what was going on with Mom.
Right. And so then we endeavored to get Dr. Ficklin's attention by going back there. And in the meantime, he had ordered
go ahead. A new bottle of ice to be put on the oxygen tank that was giving Mom oxygen. Because of this, I had moved around to the opposite side of the bed so that the nurses could hook up this new oxygen tank, bottle of ice onto the tank. And as they were putting it on, then they turned to put the mask, the breathing mask, back on Mom's face. And she started thrashing and throwing her arm and fighting it. And then I noticed blood bubbling from her mouth, and I pushed him away, and I said, "Leave her alone." And I took hold of her and put her face right up in my neck, put my arms around her. Dr. Ficklin had motioned the nurses to step back when I said this, and Wendell had come around by me, and I just held Mom there in my neck for just a few minutes. Must have been 5 or 10 seconds, and she was gone. And I remember how hard it was to let loose. I knew she was gone, but I just couldn't comprehend or accept the fact that that wonderful, dynamic Mom was gone. We'd expected Dad to go, but not Mom. And I just could hardly let loose. Wendell was up there with me and put his arms around me, and President Ficklin and the nurses were standing there. But she was gone. It was sometime right during this time that President Ficklin also worked with Dad. I don't know whether it was when he was in there the first time or whether he just went in there right now, but he leaned down and called to him, Brother Packard, and shook him. And Dad pretty soon relaxed and went right on breathing heavy. And he stayed that way for 2.5 months. But he still knew.
But he hummed that song.
Yeah, later, yes. But he still knew that Mom was gone, and it must have penetrated his mind and made him do some subconscious thinking, because it wasn't very long after this. We were all still there, most of us. They came and got Mom and rolled her out in, I remember, the maroon-colored velvet covering that covered the whole cot that they put her on, and rolled her out of the room. And it was just after we watched her go, we went back into Dad's room, and Dad started to hum. Dad had been a very outstanding singer at one time, and he started to hum this love song. It was an old style one that was in his and their day. From this valley they say you are going. I will miss your sweet face and bright smile, for you take with you all of the sunshine that has gladdened my life for a while. And it was Red River Valley. And he hummed that song. He must have thought it over in his subconscious mind and picked out the song that would fit, because he knew Mom had gone. But he hummed that song from then on, which must have been about, I think, if I remember correctly, I'd have to look at the death certificate, but I think Mom died about 5 minutes after 5. And I imagine he hummed that song from about 5:30 for 9 hours. Over and over. Well, I take it back. He did include one other song, Neapolitan Nights. O night of splendor, O night divine, something. Anyway, he hummed that one too. But for 9 hours, he hummed that song over and over. And we kept thinking that he was going to come back to consciousness. But he didn't. And I remember Donna and I both leaning down and harmonizing with him as he sung that song. We harmonized and sang right along with him. And he still just went right ahead and sung it.
Too bad we didn't have a tape recorder there.
Oh, I wish
Wouldn't that have been something?
Oh, I wish we had it. But we harmonized with him, and he still hummed it.
Yeah, I remember that.
Oh, and the nurses and the President Ficklin, they said they'd never had an experience like that in all the time they'd been in the hospital. They were amazed, but they knew what had happened too. And most of them, I presume, were members of the church, and I know President Ficklin was. But
I guess that fulfills the scripture where it says, the Spirit speaketh unto the Spirit.
You bet. Dad knew it.
Yeah.
But then they took Mom, and Dad was unconscious, and we took turns. We stayed there. Part of us stayed right there, and the funeral was, but also that was General Conference. Conference was 3 days then, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
That was the 6th of April, Saturday.
It was the 6th. Did I say the 2nd? The 6th of April. We stayed there, at least a number of us. I remember Donna singing with us and us visiting, and several of the others, until Saturday, and we went up to Bountiful Saturday to be to the funeral.
You see, our children got themselves ready and come down and came up into the hospital there and saw Dad as he was. We were sure proud of those kids. 10
little kids, all
getting themselves all. They looked so nice when they came in.
I remember that. Yeah. How good they looked. Going to conference and coming down for the funeral. We had phoned them, and they got ready, drove down themselves, and it seems to me like it was Friday that they came. And then we went on down to Bountiful for the funeral, and I remember that evening, Friday, President Henry D. Moyle phoned Dee and told him that President McKay was releasing him from attending General Conference Saturday afternoon, that he might attend Mom's funeral.
And Dee asked him to speak.
And Dee asked him if he would speak. Yes, it was. It was a real thrill. And also I remember there were was it David Smith that was Bob's mission president, came also.
Did he speak too?
And it seems like he spoke too,
Yes.
representing Bob, because Bob felt that Mom would prefer that he stay in the mission field. And then there was also some telegrams read, one from Ezra Taft Benson and one from Hugh B. Brown,
Right.
that were read at her funeral because they couldn't attend and paying her tribute. But at the program, I remember Wendell gave the obituary, and I remember Vaughn singing I Walk Today Where Jesus Walked, because Mom loved that song. And I also remember the benediction was given by Jay, and I remember that prayer. Do you remember?
Yeah.
I remember his prayer. It was beautiful. And then Dee dedicated the grave. And I remember those sons of Mom's were the pallbearers. And it was marvelous.
That was a very notable day. It was the 6th of April.
Yeah. And a wonderful life lived by Mom. A real challenge to all the rest of us to live as she expected us to. She really, all her life, expected us to live that type of life. She just almost pushed. It was wonderful. And I hope that we can make this a real tribute to her by making this tape of her death. Well, after Mom's death, after the funeral, and the lovely dinner that was served by the people of Bountiful there, we went back, and Wendell left, and the children left me off at the hospital. We had decided that we'd take turns staying with Dad until he gained consciousness. And of course, we didn't think it'd be too long. And I was the first one that was decided that we should stay. And I remember I stayed there and I read scriptures and I sang with him and I talked to him and sang to him. He didn't sing anymore after that one time. But I remember I stayed at Wendell's brother, Delbert, in Geneva, and had the opportunity of going to the temple in Logan 2 or 3 times. And that was a real thrill. However, I remember how touching it was at times because I just couldn't accept the fact that Mom wasn't there, that I couldn't talk to her anymore. I couldn't tell her all the wonderful things that were happening in our family. And for a long time after that, I remember every time, when Wendell received his call for a mission to go to Hong Kong, I remember how I wished that I could call Mom and tell her, because we always were so grateful to be able to tell her of the progression that was made, because this is what she lived for.
It's sure wonderful. You brought back to my memory the way that Geneva, Delbert's wife, and the community there provided for our comfort. They had us out to dinner, I think every day, didn't they?
I think so.
For a period of time there. And things were brought into Geneva's place. She served, we had a great dinner there, at least several times.
Oh, and she made us so welcome, Delbert and Geneva did. It was wonderful. Well, I hope that this helps with this tape that you want, but as far as Daddy and I can remember, this is the way it happened. And I've always said that I was so thankful that I was there, that I was right there and had my arms around Mom when she left. I just thought it was a real honor to have that privilege. I was glad I was there. I want to add a P.S. to this as I think about it. At the funeral, President C. Reed Miller, I remember, made the comment that Mom was the most amazing woman he had ever known. And I literally believe that, and he did too, and he knew her well. He had helped her in every phase of her life after they lived there in Meridian. I wanted to be sure that was it. This is Beth again. After Wendell and I recorded this, the girls wanted to hear all the rest of the tape, so we played the whole thing over again. I'm glad we did. There's several things that I realize. I'm glad, for instance, that Bob corrected his mission president's name. It was Henry A. Smith instead of David. I'm very glad that Floyd reminded us of Dad wanting his garments on, because we both remembered that after Floyd mentioned it, because it let us know that Dad was still there. His spirit was still there, and he knew that he didn't have his garments on. Another thing I'd like to mention, for the record, it was the Bradley Airport out of Boise where we waited and they were supposed to land. And another very important thing that I thought I'd like to add, and that is, after Mom passed away, and we went into Dad's room, and Dad relaxed back to sleep, and they called the coroner to come and get Mom. We helped, or we were in there when they lifted her onto this little rolling cart that was low to the ground, maybe a foot off the ground. And I remember that when they lifted it off, where there was some beads. Oh, the largest one was about the size of my thumbnail, and on down, white beads that Mom had been wearing that were broken during the accident, and they had fallen down her neck in the back, and they were deeply embedded in her flesh when they lifted her, and I felt so bad, because if I had known that, I could have moved those, and I imagine she was uncomfortable because of it, because they were pressed way in, and I'm sure they must have hurt her, and her not knowing what hurt and hurting all over, she naturally didn't say. We also got her black and white dress that she wore at that time. Didn't have but just a few spots of blood on it, and her pink nylon corselet that had just some blood on one garter. The rest of it was clean. We still have those things. But again, I'm thankful for this opportunity of reminiscing and thinking back of Mom. What a tremendous woman she was. All her life, I can never remember when she put herself first. She never thought of her own progression or desires, but she was one that certainly progressed every time she helped her children. Her greatest desire was her family. And like the old Indian that carried the person across the stream, he got across himself by doing it, and I'm sure this is Mom's glory, and everything that she gained in this life was certainly while she was helping someone else. I remember so many times in the shop when I was helping her. So many times people had come in, and I remember one particularly older woman that had a very badly fallen stomach, and she was poor. And Mom, it was under a doctor's prescription that she had been sent to Mom in the first place, and I remember Mom putting this corselet on her, or corset it was, And then she wanted to show her how nice she looked, so she put a slip and then a dress on her and showed her just how nice that lifted her and gave her good shape, besides making her feel good, feel that she was back in shape instead of losing half of herself. And then Mom told her that was her gift to her, and she wouldn't take a penny for it. And the woman went out of the shop crying that Mom would do such a thing. But I saw her do that many a time. Many a time I saw Mom do that. Nothing had any value to her unless it would help someone. And she took steps in her life that normal people wouldn't. That's why President Miller said she was the most amazing woman he had ever seen. Because normal people wouldn't do the things she did to reach the goal that she wanted to reach, to accomplish greater things than that little thing. Now, just as an example, like setting fire to our house. I don't know whether all of you knew that or not, but she did. And it was only because we lived in a little shanty shack that we had added on to that winter, and she knew that we had enough insurance that would build a new, nice home, brick one like we did. And we didn't know at the time, but we found out later when we were taking care of Dad. But Mom did that, risking her own safety, because she knew that we would progress further and do more with our family if we had a nicer home. And this was Mom. Now, that was a very unusual thing to do, but Mom would do just that. And other things. She was a most amazing woman. I'm so grateful that I was born of her. I keep thinking that we must have been pretty choice people to have been chosen to come through that lineage, because as I look at it now, all the progenitors that Mom and Dad have, what a tremendous family, what a marvelous spiritual strength it is in the church and in the world, and talent, everything. Mom herself wasn't a showy talent, but she certainly had the ability. She could have somebody else she could have someone else learn a reading the way we did. She never actually learned it, but boy, she knew if we missed a word, and she knew the expression that needed to be in it, and could give it. The same with singing. If we missed a note, she knew it. I can remember practicing the piano, and she'd call in and tell me, that's wrong, you need to flat that or sharp that and such. And yet she herself wasn't that musically talented, but oh, she was marvelous. And again, I'm so grateful that I was blessed to be born of her, as all of you are, I know. And I'm thankful you're doing this. We'll see you. Bye-bye.